There is a lot of talking out there when it comes to vintage audio, vintage hi-fi, also vintage recording gear. But is it just trendy, or is there a reason why there is such an interest? And so many audiophiles just completely dedicate their attention to that sector. Let's discover more on how we listen and through what we listen, because there are a lot of things that sometimes we forget about and we rely only on what we have under our eyes. And maybe we should change that. Let's discover more in this episode today. Okay guys, this is going to be a strange episode because as you know, every once in a while I like to discuss, analyze, think about certain topics related to hi-fi, high fidelity, the way we listen, we play back our music, and not only. Today also a few hints also on the recording facts, because as you may know, I'm also interested on that side. In any case, we're going to go through 4 main clusters, we could say, of topics where we're going to analyze the pros, the cons, the differences, and which path we should follow in relation to vintage versus modern hi-fi. Mainly from a vintage perspective, meaning starting from that, what is in contrast with the modern stuff that we are using and that submerged ourselves constantly. Are you ready? Let's start now. Okay, point number 1, the pros. Let's start with the positive aspects. So, our first point is dedicated actually to the fact that vintage gear is cheap. In fact, I highly recommend it many times as an excellent starting point, or if you're on a budget. Going to search in magazines and reviews online for the latest product, you're always going to pay a premium dollar for that, which is okay. I mean, if you have it or if you don't want to spend too much time in researching, okay, no problem. But if you do invest some time, and that's the main aspect here, because you have to do some research in order to understand what type of component, what type of performance, the synergy with the rest of your system from a vintage point of view. If you invest that time and you finally locate the right component, you're going to be greatly rewarded in most cases, not always, clearly. So it is cheap if you know how to move, what to look for, what to hunt for. Absolutely. This is a pro, undoubtedly. Plus, if we move on the other side of the spectrum, meaning high end, also in that case, we can put our mittens on incredible stuff, extreme high-end stuff, once high-end stuff, which now is cheap. It's dirt cheap sometimes, really. It really depends also if there is a resurgence of some kind of technology, of I don't know, amplifiers or speakers or turntables. But if not, and you know what are the good components, you're not going to pay that much, especially if we compare, that is why it's a pro, if we compare it to high end of today. But we'll get back to this. Another good point of vintage is the build quality. Well, let's just say that overall, the general trend is that things were built better. Not always, that's for sure. But in general, as I said, yes. I mean, even in the lower segment, the quality was better in most cases than today. Another pro I would like to highlight is that in most cases you can find sonic and technical hidden jewels. A lot of times, as I said before, things are pushed by a resurgence because someone rediscovers some technology, some solution adopted, found, discovered, produced in the past, and then there's a big trend and it comes back. Like in my last video on VFET, for example, amplifiers, thanks also to Nelson Pass, there is a small interest, growing interest on that, for example, and hence the prices are going to higher a little bit. But apart from that, I mean, that's just a small example. Meaning, though, that there is so much out there that if you hunt, if you understand the technology, you're really going to find something special. For example, even my Altix, or in general, Altix speakers, they do not come at a high price, not at all. But the performance, the quality of the reproduction is as well, we could say a top-notch as high-end speakers of made today. Plus, they implement technology, as we will see after, that you cannot find today, or if you do, it costs thousands, if not dozens of thousands of euro or dollars. An important aspect that we can also underline as a pro is that this stuff, the vintage gear, has an historical value. Yes, I mean, I find it extremely interesting to experiment, to try out, to listen what that was in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. I mean, that is our history, our sonic history. And that evolution, if it is an evolution, I don't know, is important also to better understand what we have today. Absolutely. Last point, but I already said this, is money value. I mean, you can find extremely high performance at a very low budget, low investment. Where high-end in the past clearly reached very high quantities of money. I mean, high price tags, okay? But today, in most cases, I see a high-end going towards absurd, crazy, insane prices that are absolutely not justified. Actually, they decide to create incredible high prices just to make people think they're more important, there was more research, or simply to set them aside from the rest. Absolutely. I know this also because when I review some things, people open up and they tell me, you know, this component, I'm doing it just for like a few dollars, but I can't ask a few dollars because people think that it's cheap, it's not going to work. So if I ask 10, 20, 30, 40, 100 times its price, then people will pay attention to it. Insane. You guys, we are going in the wrong direction. I also did a video on this topic, if high-end is just equal to high prices. Here is a link. Okay, let's proceed now to our next point. Cons. A few cons. Well, the biggest, the huge, the almost unbearable for a lot of people con is that this gear is old, and in most cases, you're going to need service, assistance, technical support. Things are not going to work. And if they do, they're going to break at a certain point, most probably. Not always, not always. For example, I'm sure very few of you guys know that I am currently recording my voice with a 100% vintage, fully vintage, no recapping, no nothing, microphone U87 Neumann from the late 50s or early 60s, I think. Fantastic. A jewel. So it's not going to happen 100%, but in most cases, you really have to recap, change a few things, and at that point, you're good to go for a good while. But for example, with tape decks, it's just an endless process of repairing because, for example, in fact, tape decks have a lot of components inside them. And I understand that a lot of people are scared by this. It is a downside, a huge downside, absolutely. Another con is that the sound that is coming out of that vintage gear you managed to purchase may not be the original one. And you don't know, actually, unless someone has a reference or knows exactly how the sound signature of that specific component should sound. Because it deteriorated inside, some components broke, or worse, somebody did some mods. That happens a lot, more often than we think, because if it works, a lot of times we don't even open it, but you don't know if someone did that little modification because he wants to enhance the sound, changing everything, unfortunately. Yes. Another con is connected to these is that even though they had a great build quality, in the end, clearly it is fragile material. We do have to pay attention. It's not something new, clearly. I mean, that's obvious. Let's proceed now to our next point, the most juicy part of this video, the differences, okay? Let's proceed. Okay, so this is a very important point. I'm probably going to do a dedicated video up ahead. But there is something very important on how we listen today in contrast with how we used to listen in the past. General trends, okay? Clearly, the people have their own ideas and solutions, but we're talking through general trends. And in fact, I had an idea which was perfectly described and materialized by Jonathan Weiss of Ome Audio, which I'm sure you guys maybe have heard about. The Oswald's Mill Audio. He actually started also his own YouTube channel, which I will link here below. Very interesting stuff. Now, he is very high-end, okay? I mean, for example, his top turntable, the prototype of his top turntable is Michael Fremer's reference. I mean, there are incredible components, amplifiers, speakers, things like that, turntables that he does with his philosophy. Clearly accessible only for a very restricted part of the population. Nevertheless, I like his philosophy. He has this huge place that he refurbished where he gathered so much old technology, vintage gear. I mean, it's fascinating to see all the different types of speakers, of turntables, of amplifiers that we don't even have memory anymore. We always think of those 2 or 3 models, 2 or 3 brands, but there's so much. And he explains that and shows that in his videos. Very interesting. And one thing he always underlines, and finally I said, yes, someone that is explaining what I have always thought inside myself. Maybe not so precisely as he did, and he is doing, but I finally understood what was my difficulty. Very simply, we do not listen. Our hi-fi experience is not as the one in the past. We forgot specific type of technology, specific type of approaches in creating the gear and also listening. Meaning that now we mainly rely on super muscle power amplifiers. A lot of times we don't even use preamps. In worst cases, we use a all-in-one box with DACs and things inside for streaming. Belt turntables, even the source. Dynamic drivers, mainly dynamic drivers. Also powered subwoofers inside, like me, I had with my Triton reference speakers by Golden Ear. We forgot that there's also a different side. I don't want to say it's better, but in my personal opinion, it is absolutely 100%. But I can't say it's objective, clearly. How we used to listen in the past, how we used to reproduce in the past. Also recording, but we'll get to that after. Meaning that we used to use low power tube, mainly tube technology amplifiers. Preamplifiers, yes, it's something more rare, even though it was present in the past. But also the type of drivers of our speakers, full range drivers, for example, or horn drivers. which is among the most natural and easy to drive type of driver. I mean, high sensitivity speakers are hard to find. I said this so many times because in order to use a low power tube amp, which has that finesse, that extreme, exquisite quality that solid state is never going to be able to reach, you need clearly a highly efficient speaker, high sensitivity. And you don't find that. There are just a few models out there, very esoteric, very extremely expensive. That's why I had to throw myself on the Altics, which do need some energy, actually, in the end. It's not the optimal solution, actually, not even the Altics, due to its complex crossover. But apart from that, I mean, it's just to say that we forgot a little bit about this. And a lot of times, only old people, old school guys seem nerding out on that, but they have some good points. I mean, I think that even though you want to grab a 200-watt amplifier with very low sensitivity speakers of today with, I don't know, ceramic drivers or something like that, very difficult to drive, you should at least pass through experiment tube gear with the proper setup. Also, the sources, absolutely. For example, as we said, vinyl. Try to experiment an idler type, not only belt, because there is a huge difference. I agree with Jonathan. He underlines this so many times. And in fact, a special idler turntable is about to come out on this channel in the future, but I'll leave you there. So this is something very, very important, which I deeply want to underline. I'm not saying it has to be the path for everyone, but you must, if you're an audiophile, at a certain point, try experiment a few components and possibly put them all together to see what was the way we used to listen, because that was the main way for decades and decades. Another important difference is how things are done, clearly talking about tape. Tape is a fundamental aspect. Most of the recording history of human beings was done on tape. So it has that sound signature. And it remained, we could say, more or less, with its characteristics, going on vinyl, okay? So there was this analog recording and playback type of sound, which we are losing, which we have lost, clearly. I mean, digital is great, it's fantastic when it's done properly, very rarely when it's correctly mastered also, when we're talking about media, but that's a different story. Hence, it's just something that we do not have access anymore, and no wonder a lot of audiophiles or a lot of artists do want to produce their records, their albums with an AAA chain, or at least use tape to do that and then do a digital transfer, because that's already also something interesting. But apart from that, also the mixing gear, meaning the consoles, and not a DAW, not a software, computer software. I mean, that changes, it processes a lot the signal. Hence, the final result, together with the gear, as we said above, it just changed completely our way of listening, and in my opinion, the quality went down the hill big time. I did a video entitled The Digital Disease, which touches a few of these topics. Here is a link. You're going to find all the links in the video description. Connected to this, also cassettes. I mean, it's something now a little exotic that we look from a distance. Most people, I mean, I know a lot of you are tape heads and know exactly how to use them and have great joy by using them, but most people don't. They think, actually, that it was crapola. Bad stuff. I did the same until finally, when now as an adult with some money, I was able to have access to quality tapes, quality decks, quality components that really revealed the potential, the high quality, incredible sonics of cassettes, plus the fact that you could record your stuff. This involves also reel-to-reel, where you could record your music, obviously, but also your music, meaning coming from your vinyl, but also CDs and things like that, but also your own music, recording your demos or things like that. That's completely gone. It's all through a computer, all through software, where there's a detachment. There is a complete detachment there. And that detachment is that glue, in technical terms, is just something missing, and you can perfectly hear it in the final obscene results of today's music. Okay, enough talking only about the good side. Clearly, we must also talk about transparency. Okay, for you, transparency is fundamental. I don't know why, unless you are a producer, unless you want to monitor something, then it makes perfectly sense. Transparency isn't something actually easily found in vintage gear, in vintage productions, okay? There's a lot of color, absolutely. Distortion, color. Personally, I find that fabulous, fantastic, enjoyable, engaging. That is that touch, that soul. It gives personality to the music. But I understand that a lot of people just want to have what was happening during the session recording, hence something perfectly neutral. And you have to rely on modern equipment, mainly solid state, if you want that. True. Does it sound good? I'll leave it to you. Connected to this, in fact, is also the concept of sonic limitations. We must admit that most vintage gear is lacking in the lower and upper register some frequencies, for example. There is major distortion sometimes. So we have to bear in mind that vintage equipment isn't the solution for everything. Absolutely. A lot of times we do have these problems, which can become issues, especially after some time has passed and things are not properly working. Absolutely. We have to say this. Another difference we could say is that we are lacking specific type of components in vintage era. Sorry if I'm touching my face, my nose. A lot of people complain about that, but I have a severe allergy that it just starts sometimes, and it's very hard to deal with. So please forgive me about that. Okay, a lack of components, yes. Meaning that, for example, in the past, we don't have external phono preamps, something rare, or tape preamps, that's even more rare. Or specific high-quality materials in specific components, meaning, for example, OCC copper or OFC copper. Even the cables weren't that good. Absolutely, the connectors were very, very bad. So all the different types of accessories for dampening solutions and things like that, that's completely missing. So clearly, there is a lot missing in the past. Because I want to underline, we're not saying that everything is perfect, everything is better. Absolutely not. There are a lot of differences, good differences and bad differences. Another important difference is that, unfortunately, something I already touched above, is that we have forgotten specific types of technology. Or at least we don't have the system, the chain around it in order to produce it. We are fighting in several videos, for example, on we can't get our heads around this, why we can't create any more quality Walkmans and more specifically quality cassette decks or reel-to-reel decks. It's extremely hard. We don't have that technology. And if we manage to do that, you have to practically start over, reinvent the wheel, and flush an enormous amount of money, which in fact always brings to a halt the different projects that tried to start. Unfortunately, it's very, very difficult. Also, the VFET technology I exposed in my last video, here is a link. That is something that's never going to come back. But the sonics, as I said in that video, are so amazing that it is just became my solid state reference, solid state. as a solid state reference. Absolutely. I mean, the quality of that amplifier, that Sony, is just outstanding. Nothing comparable to modern equipment. And I tested a few amps today, high-end amps. They don't even come close, as I said in that video. Okay, a little mention also on the recording side within this point dedicated to differences. I'm sure a lot of you are not aware of this, but since I am interested in recording gear and recording in general, if you go on Reverb, which is a famous platform like eBay dedicated to music gear, you clearly understand just after a few minutes, and also if you watch at videos about producers, small producers, big producers of music, everyone is after chasing vintage sound, meaning vintage gear. You just have to take a look at the plugins that they're making for modern software to create music, the samples, the processing of the digital signal. That's where the plugin comes in with emulating those vintage sounds, instruments, effects. And in fact, that is also why so many people try to purchase, spending enormous amounts of money on vintage equipment to have that special sound, on compressors, microphone preamplifiers, microphones. I mean, past microphones, vintage microphones are so damn good that a lot of modern companies are mainly proposing re-editions, modern interpretations of the old past microphones, because they don't make them anymore that way. And even the modern, let's say, reissues, re-editions, come close. They're not always faithful because, I mean, that sound, guys, that equipment was something else. The preamplifiers, I got some Telefunken, the V type of Telefunken, 72, 77, my Neumann microphone, Altic preamplifiers. I mean, that stuff has a specific sound, compressors, limiters, the consoles, the mixers. Everyone wants that stuff. They don't want a darn quality DAW. The Pro Tools comes in the end, or just if you have to mass produce stuff. When you want to give a soul to something, you use analog vintage equipment. And for that reason, in fact, everything is skyrocket high. The price tags are just all over the roof. Incredible. Okay, our last point. So which path? What do we do? What do we make out of all of this? Well, let's say that the vinyl resurgence, the smaller, much smaller cassette comeback, the production of quality tubes starting in the last years, tube gear, is a symptom that people are tired of immateriality, are tired of bad digital sound. They're tired of the detachment of the artist and his instruments, the complete separation from what was an analog experience, analog meaning physical, in person, with something that practically is almost completely made with a computer. And now with the artificial intelligence, things are really, really going down the hill. I mean, there's practically almost no input from humans, just the first click almost. So, but apart from that, I mean, I already discussed about this, about music, all the different problems, why it's so disappointing and depressing. Here is a link to that video. Also here below is the link in the video description. So, once again, it is a symptom that something isn't going in the right direction, that people are missing something in their lives, as recorders, as artists, as producers, but also as consumers, as people, the final people like all of us who enjoy music. So, once again, what do we do? Surely the best answer is a hybrid solution. Absolutely. 100% vintage or 100% modern equipment ain't going to do it. Absolutely not. Maybe in the future we will be able to emulate, to actually evolve and go beyond that. The vintage stuff, the vintage touch, the vintage warmth. Something that today is not achievable with digital components. Well, at least not all of it. Just sometimes we have good quality portions, we could say, of a production. Maybe there's a good mixing, maybe there's a good recording, maybe there is a new type of microphone that is stellar. Absolutely, that's why we have to imagine a hybrid solution in the recording phase, but clearly, especially in the playback phase, meaning maybe using a vintage amp, tube amp, with modern speakers, high sensitivity speakers. Good luck if you find some. Or, I don't know, a vintage preamp, if you're able to find a quality one, still working, connected to, though, a modern DAC. Clearly, that's going to be always modern. And things like that. Just meaning a little bit of everything is probably the best solution. And sometimes you're just going to find the perfect synergy using both. Like, for example, I'm using my Master Sound mainly. I always go back to that, my Master Sound preamplifier, which is a modern type of preamp, and it just works better. I find myself more happy with that when I use it with other older stuff. This is a modern component, even though it's a tube type of component connected to something more modern, more vintage, more of old school type. The combination is always the best choice, I think. Another important aspect connected to which path we should follow is that finally I see here and there, for example, Jonathan, but also, for example, Nelson Pass and also other engineers, we are finally dropping the measurement dogma. That holy God that nobody could touch. Please, finally, let's put that aside. Measurements are important, but they're not paramount. They're not the only thing that we must rely on. Absolutely. As I always say, measurements tell us about quantity. They deliver quantity. They do not talk about quality. You can infer quality from quantity. Absolutely. But as I always say, you can't determine which is the best wine, which is the best car, which is the best, chocolate bar. Yes, somebody would say, as I always say in all my videos, that you're falling in a personal opinion. That is true, but we do have general trends. I mean, there is a reason why a specific girl is considered beautiful among most people, or a specific wine is considered the best or a very, very good among most other wines, or a specific car, or so many things that measurements clearly are not able to define because we are missing so much from that. And engineers that I mentioned above, perfectly understand that, use measurements until a certain point, and then they use their ears, they use their heart. I know it sounds a little lame, but that is true. I mean, they are finding that we cannot use only that. It cannot be our guidance. Both worlds, yes, both things must be present. And at that point, quality products at the right price, hopefully, will arrive. As I always say, it's important for us audiophiles to experiment. We must experiment. That is also an important path, regardless if it's modern or if it's vintage. It's good to try both parts of this journey because we're going to learn a lot from it, and we're going to find what we like more, and possibly at a good price. Something that a lot of times we audiophiles forget, and we're just committed to spend insane prices because we know that's the way it is. It doesn't have to be that way. No, absolutely. So in the end, I think, though, that I want to say this, as I already said before, vintage is a very good place to start. And after experience a lot of stuff, a very good place where to end. Okay, guys. Thank you for watching this video, and remember, music is born analog.
Well, guys, if you're enjoying my videos and you're enjoying my channel, please consider to subscribe by clicking the black and white logo here below. Also, don't forget to click the notification bell so you'll never miss an episode and you will become a true member of the analog community.